Hey everyone, welcome back to Alfred's Basic Adult Piano Course, Greatest Hits, Level 1. This video is Lesson 3, covering page 4 and 5 in our book, the song My Heart Will Go On. And this is the love theme from the movie Titanic, which was made famous by Celine Dion. So I will be very honest that this is not my favorite arrangement of this song. What happens when you're using some of these beginning piano books, especially the ones that take popular songs and create arrangements that are a little bit easier for beginning pianists, you lose some of the rhythms and maybe some of the bigger chords that are in the original piece. So this is a very popular piece that a lot of you may have heard for all your life, or at least since 1997 when it came out. So you're probably going to be tempted to play what you're used to hearing and what is on instead of what's on the page here. And this is not very uncommon to have arrangements that have different rhythms or sometimes different notes than what we're used to hearing. So again, you're going to want to play what you're used to hearing. And you may say, well, what's wrong with that? That's the way the song goes. Well, in a way, there's nothing wrong with that. It's great to be able to hear and reproduce something you're used to. That's certainly one aspect of learning to play an instrument. But there's another way of looking at that, and that's just, knowing when you're doing it on purpose versus doing it on accident. So, in other words, you may see a particular rhythm on the page, but you're not actually playing that rhythm. You're playing something different that you're used to. So if you can get to the point where you recognize, okay, what I'm seeing on the page isn't what I'm used to hearing, and I understand the difference, and now I'm able to play both ways. So I'll explain a little bit that in this lesson as we actually go through this piece. But again, this is not uncommon, and this is just something, if you are aware of and recognize more of, you will become a much better musician. Okay, so this particular arrangement, the melody goes back and forth between the left hand and right hand. It starts out in the left hand. So I like to split the hands up and look at one hand at a time. So I think we had this in the previous lesson with Edelweiss, that if we just look at the left hand here at the beginning, that's not just the melody, So some of the notes in the left hand are melody and some are not. Won't really make sense until we actually put the hands together, and that's when I'll really explain more about where the melody is. But for now, I'm going to start with the left hand because the first three measures of the piece, the melody is in the left hand. All right, so at the beginning of the piece, we see a couple things here. Moderately slow, so it's not a very fast piece. It's pretty obvious. The slower a piece of music, the less time it's going to take to learn. Obviously, if you have a faster piece, you've got to play it more and more so you can read it, play it that much faster. 4/4 times, so 4 beats per measure. There are two verses, you can see at the very beginning, verses 1 and 2 different sets of lyrics. So the whole piece repeats itself. Again, I'm not that crazy about this arrangement, so I'm not even going to worry about playing it twice. Of course, if you want to, go for it. I'm not going to tell you not to. But, there are some times where you just make a personal decision and say, do I really want to play this entire piece the same way again? Now, of course, I can get into other ways of playing it, but that's not what this lesson's about. We're just going to study exactly what's on the page here today. All right, so like I said, the melody begins in the left hand. And so your left hand is going to be in the middle C position, if you're familiar with that position from the other Alfred series, the Basic Adult Piano Course Lesson Book, Level 1 series. So that puts your left hand thumb on middle C, which happens to be our first note. So let's go through these notes first. Not really going to dwell on rhythm just yet. So first measure, we have 4 middle Cs. Second measure, we go down to B and back to middle C again for a half note, and then finally one more quarter note. Our third measure, there's B again, which is second finger, and once again back to middle C for a half note, 2 beats. We're going to rest on beat 4. We have a quarter rest there. On the last measure, fourth finger down on G, it should already be there. Skip up to B, second finger. And then the second line is 4 C's again in the first measure. Second measure, B, and then back to 3 C's. And then the last two measures, we go down to G, fourth finger, and that is tied. 2 whole notes, so that's a total of 8 beats. Down on the third line, measure 9, we have 4 middle C's again. In fact, this line is the same as the first line. So measure 10 is B, back to middle C for 2 counts, middle C again. Third measure, B, back to middle C. Quarter rest on beat 4, last measure, fourth finger on G, second finger on B. And then the bottom line, measure 13, it's almost the same again. 4 middle C's. Second finger B in the next measure. Back to middle C for 2 counts. Middle C on beat 4. Down to G in the third measure, which again is our fourth finger. And lastly, G, followed by second finger on B. All right, so that takes us to the end of the first page. So really, you only have 3 notes in your left hand on this entire first page. Mostly middle C's. Every now and then you have a B. And then occasionally you have a G. So if you want to think about it this way, on this first page, all you're using is your thumb, second finger, and fourth finger on those 3 notes. You're not even using the third or the fifth finger. Now that will change on the next page here. So let's go to the top of page 5. Continuing on the top line, measure 17, new note. Well, new as in we haven't played it yet. So the third finger is on A for 4 counts because it's a whole note. Next measure, B for 3 counts, dotted half note. Beat 4 down to G. And now the third measure up there, we have 2 notes at the same time. We have F and middle C. Fifth finger on F, thumb on middle C. 4 beats because it's a whole note. Next measure, 4 and 2. They're not being used, but they should be right there on G and B. And then the last measure, third finger right in the middle on A. So there's an interesting little pattern there. It's almost like a triangle, if you will. On measure 19, the third measure up there, watch the fingering. C and F, 1 and 5. Now the next measure, I'm going to use 2 and 4. And then the last measure, I'm going to use 3. So I've got this pyramid, this triangle, I'm kind of working my way up. Here's the bottom, here's the middle, here's the top. So that can kind of help you with those 3 measures. On measure 22, second line, second finger on B. Then we go to middle C for 2 counts. Back to B. Next measure, A for 3 counts. And then we have our first pair of 8th notes. On beat 4, B and A. Next measure down to G for 2 beats. And on beat 3, 2 more 8th notes, G and A. Beat 4 is B. Next measure, A. And we're basically repeating what we did on the top line right here. So the last measure here on the second line is the same as the second measure on the top line. Second finger on B for 3 counts. Fourth finger down on G for beat 4. Measure 27 on the third line. These next 3 measures, it's that triangle I was telling you about. F and C with 5 and 1 for 4 beats. Next measure, G and B, 4 and 2. And then third measure, that third finger on A. And then the next measure, B, second finger, to middle C for 2 counts. Back to B. Next measure, B again. A and C, so that's your third finger on A and your thumb on C. Okay, and that's 2 counts. Rest on beat 4 and our bottom line, G, fourth finger, and that's for 2 counts. B, second finger, and that's for 2 counts. And now, in our next measure, we have a half rest for 2 counts. And then we have G, and this G is tied for 2 plus another 4 counts for a total of 6 counts. And we end the piece in our last measure with our thumb on middle C. So that covers the notes and the fingering for the left hand. So the entire piece, the left hand is in that middle C position, and you won't move the hand at all. And if you don't move the hand at all, you can actually read fingering. Now, I always recommend reading notes as well to help learn your notes, but that's the cool thing about having a chunk of music, or in this case, the entire song, where your hand doesn't move. Then it's like assigned fingering. You don't even have to look at the key. Just think second finger, and it's always going to play the beat. So that's kind of an advantage you also have with the left hand. Now, before we get to the right hand, let's look at the rhythms of the left hand a little bit further. There are some eighth notes in the piece, not many. They were over in measure 23 and 24. But the rule is, if I've got eighth notes, I can't count 1, 2, 3, 4. I have to count 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. I now have to think in halves. But so many of the notes in this piece are quarter notes or greater. But that makes it even more important, because you don't want to rush the quarter notes at the beginning of the song. You don't want to go 1, 2, 3, 4. And then when you get to the eighth notes on the next page, go 4 and. That means I'm playing the eighth notes and the quarter notes at the same tempo, and they're not supposed to be. Eighth notes are twice as fast. Now, if you're really good, sure, you can count 1, 2, 3, 4, and when you get to the eighth notes, again on page 5 on measure 23, you could go 1, 2, 3, 4, and 1, 2, 3, and 4. So a lot of people end up, counting that way, and they just know how to put the eighth notes in fast enough. But if you're skeptical about that, if you're not sure, count the whole piece with and. So I'm going to do that. Yes, it's annoying, it's tedious, but it works. It works, and I promise it won't be that way forever. Meaning, I'm not saying it won't always work. I'm just saying that you'll get to the point where you don't even have to rely on counting the ands. You'll be so used to it that it'll just come naturally. All right, so here we go. The very beginning left hand. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and, remember the quarter rest, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 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 right there. So easy to speed that up because it's 8 very long beats. Now eventually your right hand will join in and that'll make it easier. But it's so easy to speed that up. So important to count your full 8 beats. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and don't speed up like I just did when I just counted it. But make sure it's nice and even. Okay, so now in measure 9, the third line. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 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 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. So that covers the first page. And just as a reminder, the first and third lines, and this will go for both hands, are the exact same thing. And in several ways, the second and fourth line are very similar too. So just throwing that out there as a reminder. And when I say same, both notes, fingering, and rhythms Now let's go on to page 5 at the top. So just the left hand again at measure 17. And 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 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 and I'm going to stop just for a second because those are the two measures where the left hand has the eighth note. So we've been doing all this 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and counting basically for that moment. So make sure that doesn't sneak up on you because you can just get so used to not playing eighth notes and all of a sudden they're there. But if you're counting properly, remember in measure 23, the B and the A is assigned to 4 and then measure 24, the G and the A, 2 and. Okay, so one more time. Just to review, let me start at measure 22. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 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 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. All right. That notice there at the end it says slower second time. So if you were to repeat the whole piece, when you get to those last 2.5 measures or so, you're going to start slowing down your tempo, your count, which is typical when you reach the end of a piece. I didn't do it just then. I'll probably do it when we put the hands together. But if you're only playing the piece one time through, then you can just do it at the end of that first time. So basically, when you're going to end the song, that's when you're going to slow down there at the end. Okay, so now let's go on to the right hand. Now most of the notes in this piece are in the left hand. A lot of the melody is in the left hand. Some of the melody is in the right hand and there's some notes in the right hand that are not melody. But the right hand is not quite as busy, especially on this first page. So your right hand is actually going to be in the middle C position as well. So when we put hands together, this is where you have overlapping thumbs, which we'll get to in a moment. But for now, if you're just doing your right hand, thumbs on middle C. And actually, it's even called the C position originally in our other book, our Alfred's lesson book level 1. So when you have that hand position there, your first note is your third finger on E. And notice that is a whole note tied to another whole note. So 8 beats, you're going to hold this E. Okay. The third measure, you have 3 beats of rest, a half rest for 2 counts, a quarter rest on beat 3, and then you come in on beat 4 with this second finger on D. And the last measure, you have E for 2 counts, and back to D for 2 counts. Second line, you've got that E again, tied for 8 counts in 2 measures. Third measure, you have a half rest for 2 counts, and then come in with your 4th finger on F for 2 counts, and our last measure, E for 2 counts, and then D for 2 counts. So those 3 notes are just walking down, F, E, D. Third line, you're back to that E again. So there's a pattern here. The first 2 measures of every line on this page, you have the E in the right hand for a total of 8 counts. Now on that third line, third measure, remember we said the third line is like the first line. So you have 3 beats of rest on the third measure, come in on D on beat 4, and your last measure is E for 2 counts and D for 2 counts. So our bottom line is that E, once again for 8 counts across the first 2 measures, Third measure, you've got a half rest for 2 counts, coming on F for 2 counts, E for 2 counts, and D for 2 counts. So that's the same as the second line. The left hand's a little different there than the second line, but the right hand's exactly the same. So that F, E, D, just walking down. Okay, so that takes care of the right hand on the first page. Now, it gets a little bit more busy here on the next page. Measure 17 at the top, first line, we have our thumb on middle C. So we're going to hold that for 4 counts. The next measure, D, second finger, for 3 counts. Quarter rest on beat 4. Jump up to G, so that's your 5th finger on the third measure for 2 counts. Followed by F, E, next measure is D for 2 counts, and then E, F. Last measure, C and E together. So that's 1 and 3 for 2 counts. On beat 3, second finger right in the middle of those 2 notes on D. And then middle C. And then you rest on the second line. You have 3 measures of whole rests. So when you come back in on the 4th measure on that second line, you're repeating what you just did at the top line again. So that's middle C for 4 counts, followed by D for 3 counts, followed by a quarter rest on beat 4. Jumping up to that G on the third line for 2 counts, followed by F, E, D for 2 counts, back to E, up to F, and next measure, that's C and E together for 2 counts, and then D right in the middle on beat 3, and then middle C. The next measure, whole rest. The last measure on that line, half rest and a quarter rest coming on beat 4, second finger on D. Bottom line, E for 2 counts, D for 2 counts, middle C for 3 counts. Then you have the only 2 eighth notes that the right hand ever plays in this piece, D and C. Next measure back to D, all the way up to G for 2 counts, back to D, and we end the song with third finger on E. The exact same note and finger we started the song on. So the right hand does not change hand positions the entire piece. It stays in the C position. So again, assigned fingering. Third finger, for example, will always play E, as long as you don't move your hand. So we could probably go through this right hand with counting. It's going to be so tedious with these long notes, but I'm actually not going to do it because it's easy enough, especially on this first page, to put the hands together. So let's go ahead and do that very slowly. Now, like I said, the left hand has your melody in the beginning. So you don't want this to happen when you put the hands together. Okay, I exaggerate, but I banged out that E in the right hand. That E in the right hand is background. It's supporting the melody in your left hand. So you want to try to make this as soft as you can. Now the music doesn't tell us that, it just says mezzo forte. But the rule is this: always try to get your melody louder as best as you can. Especially an opportunity like this where the right hand isn't doing much. So you want that melody to be singing above the right hand. So you really want to work on that. So the first note on beat 1 isn't going to be that easy because you're doing both hands at the same time, but you're going to try to make the right hand softer and the left hand louder. And to do that at the same time takes a lot of practice. You basically have to be heavy with the left hand, light with the right hand at the same time. Now, if it's not perfect, that's okay. This is a beginning book. Again, they're not asking for it. But on beat 2, 3, and 4, as the left hand continues, make sure you bring out those notes. Okay, so there's that. At this point, as you start putting it all together, you might be wanting to play this. That's not the rhythm that's written here. That's the rhythm that we're probably used to hearing in the original song. It's a different, little more complicated rhythm. So I want you to refrain from that. You might be tempted to play that. And this is not very exciting. Again, I will admit. That is not the most musical sound. However, like I said, recognizing that that's what's on the page, understanding how to take what's on the page and play it down here, despite the fact that we want to play what we're used to hearing. So I always say, learn it the way it's written so you understand how to read and how to translate it to the piano. Once you're done, then play it the way you want, Be able to do it both ways. That'll make you a very complete musician. All right, so I digress. We're supposed to put the hands together here. So once again, first two measures, your right hand's not doing much. Now in measure 3, make sure you rest in the right hand for 3 counts. And when the right hand comes in on beat 4, the right hand now has melody. So those 3 notes in the right hand are melody. These are not in the left hand. Now, if you can't make them softer, that's okay. But if you can, and you recognize the melodies in the right hand, that will put you in a better position musically. The second line starts out the same as the first line. The E in the right hand holds for 8 counts, and it's just background. Third measure, make sure you rest. Get off that E on the first 2 beats. That G should be all by itself. Now, the G is melody for 8 counts. So if that's our melody note and it's just being held, don't play your right hand too loud. See, as I'm playing that, I still hear my G. So let's say the singer is singing that melody note and the band all of a sudden gets so loud you don't even hear the singer holding that note. No, that's not what you want. You want to hear that note from the singer, and your band in your right hand is playing softer. Okay? Third line, just like the first line. Yeah, did you see what I did wrong? I'm kind of glad I did it so you can see how easy it is on measure 11. I did not get off the E. I did not rest. Now, is it terrible? No, but it's sloppy. And if you get off the E, then the left hand should be all by itself, kind of like a solo. So make sure, again, you don't get lazy with those long E's. 8 counts is a long time, and then we forget about it. So starting right there on measure 11, and then rest in your left hand on beat 4, and then both hands together. Bottom line. And rest on beats 1 and 2 in the right hand. Come in on beat 4. In the last measure, none of that is melody. And it's easy to tell what's melody because you can see the word, or the words, the lyrics printed above the notes. But see those notes in the last measure at the bottom line? There are no words there, so those are not melody. So if it's not melody, try not to hit it so loud. Make it a little bit softer so you can distinguish melody from accompaniment. Okay, so I've been going through the first page pretty much at the tempo of the piece. I haven't been going very slow. So don't feel like you have to play it at that speed yet, especially when you get to measures like the very last measure on the first line. When you have these notes going together, it's a little bit more tricky. Especially when, G and E, 2 different notes, 2 different fingers, 4 and 3. Now, fortunately, when you go to B and D, it's the same finger in both notes. second fingers. So at least that kind of is a little connection. So yeah, again, don't feel like you need to go that fast yet. Go really slow. And to be technical, when you're putting both hands together and incorporating the rhythms, you definitely want to go kind of slow and count out 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and etc. etc. Let me jump over to the top of page 5. So both hands, A in the left hand, middle C in the right hand, together. Remember, when you're doing your middle C position here, that if one hand is playing middle C, the other hand, in this case the left hand, the thumb, needs to be above it. Don't feel like you need to put both fingers on there. There's going to be switcheroos. So sometimes the left hand has it, sometimes the right hand has it. Okay, don't think I went over that at the very beginning of the piece. But the very beginning of the piece, your left hand thumb is playing, so your right hand thumb has to be up and out of the way. But don't try to pull it back or anything, because it'll be that much harder to get your thumb back to middle C. So again, at the top of page 5, a right hand thumb is playing middle C, third finger A, left hand. So remember, that's 4 counts. Next measure, B and D, and those are second fingers. Those will always be second fingers when you have B and D. And then remember, rest in the right hand on beat 4 as the left hand plays G. And now you have 3 notes together. Okay? The cool thing about this is 5th finger in both hands are together. So at least you're using your 5s and then that thumb on middle C in the left hand. Okay, so your left hand, keep it down for the whole measure. It's 4 counts as the right hand moves on to F and E. And your next measure, G, B in the left hand, D in the right hand. Remember, anytime you have B's and D's, second fingers. So there's another little connection between both hands. And then you've got your 4th finger on G. Continuing with your right hand, E, F, and our last measure, get that thumb in the left hand out of the way as your right hand plays middle C. And then as far as A in the left hand and E in the right hand, those are both 3rd fingers. So there's a connection. And then continuing in the right hand, again, keeping your left hand down. Now on the 3rd line, I'm sorry, the 2nd line, your right hand doesn't play. Don't remove it from the piano. Keep it there, but move your thumb up. Actually, you don't even have to, no, you do need to do that because your left hand's going to play. But keep it there because you need to keep it there for when you re-enter at the end of the line. So the left hand at measure 22. Remember, these are our 8th notes. So if we're counting from measure 22, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and right here, second to last measure, you're basically repeating the top line again. So that's the A and the C, followed by the B and the D, and then left hand G, and then these 3 notes, F, C, G. Again, just like we did at the top line. Right hand continues, F and E, and then these 3 notes, G, B, and D. Right hand continues on E, F. And then these 3 notes, A, C, and E. Right hand continues on D, C. Now rest in the right hand. Lift your thumb so the left hand can play right there on middle C. Last measure, B, A, and C. Rest in the left hand as your right hand plays. And on the bottom line, G and E. Remember, that's 4 and 3. B and D, so remember, that's always your second fingers. Second measure, middle C, off in the left hand for 2 counts. As you come in the left hand on beat 3, don't lift on your right hand. You're still holding that C on beat 3. And then your right hand has 8th notes. So counting this bottom line from measure 32 would go like this. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 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 that is middle C and E at the very end, 1 and 3. Now I didn't slow down. So let's say this is the last time I'm going to play the piece. So when I get to those eighth notes, that's where the slower starts. But it's a very gradual when it says slower. So back again at measure 32. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. So it really drags out by the time you get to the last measure. At that point, you don't really even have to count it. You can just kind of hold it for a while and let it fade away. Okay, so that takes care of putting the hands together. I didn't explain really where the melody is at the top of page 5, but it's basically the right hand at that point. The entire top line is all a melody. All those notes, and when it has 2 notes, it's always the top note in the last measure there. But when I go to the second line, it's obvious the left hand has melody since that's the only one playing. Now when you get to the eighth notes, remember I was saying if it's not melody, you can play it a little bit softer. Notice the symbol there above those eighth notes. That is a diminuendo. So you're actually, they want you to get softer. And then a little bit louder as you really start the chorus all over again. Because like you said, at that point, it's the same as the top. So there's a nice example of actually written in the music where they want you to be softer when it's not. But it's a nice effect to have the crescendo building back into the chorus once again. So on the last page, it's pretty obvious where melody is. It's mostly right hand, and then when the left hand is playing by itself and you see words, the left hand has melody. All right, so last thing before I end up just playing the whole piece for you so you can hear what the performance will sound like. It starts out mezzo forte. My advice is mezzo piano. Take everything down a notch. Where it says forte on page 5, I wouldn't go above mezzo forte. The reason is this piece doesn't use any pedal. Now it could, but we're not going to get into that today. The fact that you have what I consider choppy rhythms. The louder you play that, the more bangy and awful it's going to sound, in my opinion. So you want to try to make it soft and smooth as possible. And so I want to try to make this piece softer than what it is actually marked. So it's a little less obnoxious. That's just my opinion. As far as tempo, like I said, basically what I've been playing for you is about the right tempo. And then, of course, at the end, not only going to slow down, but we're going to get a little bit softer and just kind of fade away because there's a diminuendo there at the very end of the piece. But otherwise, try to play it, as smooth as you can. It's hard to play smooth when you have repeated notes, but if you're a little bit softer, now you're probably like, yeah, but you said play the melody louder than the right hand. True, I did. So everything's going to be even softer now, but still louder in the left hand than the right hand at the beginning, if you can do that. Basically on those long holds, like I said, don't bang out that note. Anywhere else in the piece where you have melody notes, don't feel like you have to play the right hand louder than the left hand. It's not easy, and it's something you will eventually learn more of, but take advantage where you have these long notes. Okay, so let me go ahead and play it all the way through. I'll give a count off, and then I will just play. So 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. And there it is. So like I said, you're welcome to play it twice if you want. Or you're welcome to just play it the one time like I did and then go ahead and put the slower in at that point. So yeah, I mean, in the end, you may end up liking this arrangement just fine. And so I certainly don't want to discourage from that. It's just, you know, in my experience, I've heard a lot of better arrangements and more accurate, but at the same time, really think about, you know, what I said earlier in the lesson, that a very, very complete musician is one who understands that what's written on the page is a different arrangement than what we're used to hearing. And so if you reproduce something on the keys, again, you want to make sure what you're playing is on purpose and not by accident. So if you're playing the rhythm you're used to, but you may end up finding yourself doing that on accident. You're trying to learn this rhythm and you're playing what you're used to. But if you're playing what you're used to and you say, I'm doing this on purpose, I understand that's that on the page and that's different than what I'm used to hearing, then you're a really good complete musician that's very aware. So that's really the biggest takeaway that I feel from this lesson, is distinguishing between the two. Because like I said, this is not uncommon to see arrangements that have different rhythms or different notes or different chords than what we're used to. All right, so, and you know, with this book, you really don't want to skip a lesson because every piece just gets more and more and more challenging. So it's not like the lesson book where every page is just a notch more challenging. Every piece in here is quite a bit more challenging than the previous. So at the same time, I don't recommend skipping this piece before going on to the next one, because you'll still be skipping a lot of important information, you know, for the learning process. All right, so I hope that I've been very clear and understandable with this lesson. If there's anything that's confusing, please don't hesitate to ask questions in the comments section below. And I look forward to seeing you in the next lesson.